All right. Hey again, everyone. Channel Futures editorial director Craig Galbraith here. Time for another episode of Channel Futures TV. Pleased today to be talking with Eric Kokonis. Eric is head of security operations product marketing at Sophos. Eric, how are you doing today?
Doing great, Craig. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely glad to have you. So anybody, Eric, who's been watching the news, well, frankly, for years now, can see that attackers, cyber attacks, they just aren't slowing down. And in fact, it seems like ransomware and some of these other threats are even more prominent than ever before. So I just ask you, what is Sophos seeing?
Yeah, it's exhausting, isn't it? It seems that every year a new set of reports comes out, annual reports from security vendors, from the intelligence community, and all of them end up with the same refrain, which is that the attacks are actually increasing in frequency. They're also increasing in complexity, and they're changing their tactics, and that requires an immediate response from organizations and the vendors that support them. And unfortunately, even though we didn't have that big marquee, ransomware attack name that was in the news cycle this year, we did have significant geopolitical conflicts with Russia invading Ukraine, which obviously has significant impact on the cybersecurity landscape and organizational risk profiles. So it still was obviously a very eventful year where, as I said, we did see an increase in the rise in frequency of attacks.
Yeah, it seems inevitable. We will see that big one that you're talking about, unfortunately. So very simply, Eric, how do organizations protect themselves, and what's the best defense?
Yeah, well, at the risk of making an incredibly obvious statement, it's very difficult to defend against modern attacks these days. And part of the reason for that, it used to be that when there was a new threat, you could deploy a new security control, or perhaps you have one in place and it just needed to be reconfigured, and that control would be able to have the right preventative response, and that response was effective enough that it could mitigate the risk. It could stop that attack. And now the problem is you've got attacks that are multi-stage, and their attackers are using various different control points and working through the system in various different ways to circumvent those point product security controls and find ways of compromising organizations and the data that they're looking to protect. And so the requirement now is for organizations to move beyond this kind of point product or point threat type approach and make sure that they have a layered system where they've got multiple security controls covering each domain of their organization. And they want to have that preventative mechanism in place, the ability to detect in place, the ability to respond in place. And those are a lot of requirements for organizations to have to follow. And that requires significant investments in people, technology, processes. And for many organizations that have to invest in other areas of the business, it's just not something that can be done in a sustainable way. If you think about the fact that even in the past couple of years, the amount of change that we've seen in the threat landscape and how attackers have adapted to the preventative mechanisms that we've put in front of them, that adaptation is only going to continue to accelerate. And the specialized skill sets that organizations need to have represented on their staff is only going to become more demanding. And we see this, every month, it seems there's another report about the talent shortage or the skills gap in cybersecurity, and that's compounded by this constant change. So if you're thinking in terms of, I'm an organization who is looking to defend against these rapidly evolving threats, I don't just need to hire, train, and retain people that can deal with what's happening today, but I need to make sure that we have an adaptive system in place so that we can adjust and respond to how the threat landscape is changing, how the attackers are changing their approach to take advantage of new vulnerabilities.
Absolutely. So, Eric, I want to talk a little bit about managed detection and response, or MDR. I've been hearing a lot about it lately. I'm curious, why outsource it? I mean, why can't companies simply just do this themselves?
Yeah, it's a great question. Managed detection and response as a market is one of the fastest growing. If you look at all services and security technology markets, it is among the fastest growing. And the reason is because increasingly organizations are finding that it is too difficult for them to manage this internally. And the question isn't whether or not they necessarily can. The bigger question is actually whether or not they should. So increasingly, does it make financial sense, operational sense to have to staff this functionality internally when, again, it's changing so rapidly and the specialization of skills that are required are so granular? Does it make sense to have that function built entirely within your own organization, or does it make sense to find a partner that is purpose-built with that adaptive capability in mind? Kind of liken this to other industries, right? We look at, 100 years ago, if you owned a factory, it was likely that you might build a power plant to send electricity to that factory. And then once electricity became a public utility, it didn't make sense for factories to have the cost burden of running their own power plant. And so similarly, we've seen this more recently with cloud computing. It used to be if you needed computing power, if you needed storage, if you needed networking capabilities, you would build that infrastructure internally for your business. And it was difficult to scale. And if you built it too big and weren't taking advantage of it, it was a significant loss. If you couldn't scale it fast enough, now you're not able to accelerate the growth of your business and it becomes an impediment to growth. And then you have things like Amazon Web Services and AWS and infrastructure as a service. And it doesn't make sense for organizations to shoulder that cost internally for their organization on their own. And we're seeing the same thing where we have this threat landscape that is going to constantly change. And it makes more sense for many organizations to work with a third-party provider like Sophos for MDR, where we're going to provide the people, the processes, the tools, and we're going to do it in a way that is adaptive and covering each of those domains of your ecosystem that I talked about before, covering your endpoints, the devices that are in your network, the network itself, what you have stored in the cloud, your email accounts, which is one of the most popular vectors for initiating an attack. And we can provide the tools and technology to detect those threats and respond to them faster than most organizations can do on their own.
All right, let's do this, Eric. Let's dig into that a little more. I want to know more about Sophos MDR, some of its new capabilities, and why they're important. You started to talk about it a little bit, but let's do a little deep dive.
Yeah. So, managed detection and response, it's as much as it's talked about now in the industry, it's still a fairly nascent market. Gartner didn't coin the term until 2016. And prior to that, you had organizations taking different approaches to MDR. But really, since then, there's been two kind of set styles of delivering MDR services. And one is the kind of bring your own technology approach. And this is where you work with an MDR service provider who can take advantage of the security technology investments that you've already made. So you've purchased some sort of endpoint security tool, or you have a firewall, or you have an email solution, and they say you've made those investments. We're going to make use of those. We're going to ingest the data coming off of those, and we're going to be able to notify you of attacks and provide you some guidance. And that was really the limitation of those services, is because they're not using their own tool sets. They're not able to go as far on the R side, the response side, to be able to execute response actions on behalf of customers. So for a lot of those organizations, they were working with these MDR vendors who can notify them of threats and then give them work to do on their own with the internal resources that they have to address those threats. The other market were your technology vendors who started selling MDR as an overlay to their tech stack. So if you had a large endpoint security vendor, they might say, here's our services in the form of MDR. They're going to take advantage of our tool in order to detect and respond to threats. So the plus side there is, because they're using the tool, they can go further on the response side, execute more actions on behalf of the customer. The downside is the vendor lock-in component, where now the MDR service needs to be using the tool set that they use to deliver the service, and the customer might have to rip and replace the investments that they've already made in their environment. So what we did very recently with expanding our MDR services is our goal was to be able to provide for both of those scenarios. So if you're an organization that's made significant investments in technology and even the processes that are built around those tools, we can take advantage of those tool sets. We can work with those third-party tool sets the same way that those bring your own technology MDR vendors do, and we can deliver those MDR outcomes. On the other side, if you're an organization that's looking to consolidate around a tool set that is designed and built to work together, an integrated tool set, we have the most expansive tool set in the industry with our MDR offering, and we can do that as well. because some organizations do want to realize the operational efficiencies and the financial efficiencies of consolidating around a tool set, and how that tool set is designed to work together. So we wanted to provide the best of both worlds. And so that's the thing that's most exciting about our MDR offering, is the ability to meet customers exactly where they are, whether they need people, process, technology, whatever combination of that is, and then take them to whatever level of maturity they're looking to achieve next.
Good stuff, Eric. So big audience of channel partners going to be watching this video. What are some of the opportunities with Sophos that you want them to know?
Yeah. So, I mean, this is where the growth in the MDR market is a lot of it is being driven by managed services providers. So this is, in most managed service providers, it's the largest growing opportunity in their portfolio. And so with the channel partners and managed service partners that we work with, there's really a lot of different ways that we can help unlock the opportunity that exists in MDR and start realizing more of that revenue. For some of those MSPs, they want to have us provide the MDR service on top of what they're doing. So maybe they have their core catalog of competencies that they want to deliver to customers, but they don't want to have to get involved in the threat detection and response piece, especially when we're talking about incident response. And again, the specialization that requires. So they'll provide their service to the customer, and then they use Sophos MDR as the overlay to provide that incident response and MDR capability that we offer. For some of our MSPs, they have this capability already in place. They can offer a managed detection and response service. One of the difficult things, though, about MDR services, because they are contingent on having people, is they can be more difficult to scale. As you grow your customer base, you need to have more analysts, and you have to be able to drive efficiencies in your processes to deliver for those customers. So for some of those MSPs, they don't necessarily want to have to do that. So it becomes a shared workload model where maybe they're delivering some of the MDR services, and we are complementing what internal capabilities they have with our service. And we see this happen in different ways. It could be they don't want to hire the notoriously difficult to find, third shift analysts, right? So, but they want to work with MDR, where we can provide that 24/7 coverage. And so they could be providing their MDR service during the on hours, 8 to 5, and then we're taking over for those other two shifts. Or in some cases, they want to provide their MDR service to their premium client base, so organizations of a certain size, or that are taking advantage of certain premium offerings in their portfolio. But they don't want to leave on the table the organizations that might be smaller who want to take advantage of MDR. We can provide our MDR service with Sophos MDR, can provide service for that customer set and give the MSP the opportunity to continue serving their premium level partners. And then the other common scenario is they want Sophos MDR to handle the 99.9% of work that just takes the human element in order to complete it, and they want to handle only that top 0.1% remaining of things that really they want to have their hands on for their customers. So it can work any combination of ways and be very complementary and help them, again, unlock additional revenue streams for their business. And then the third option is they can take advantage of our XDR platform, Sophos XDR, which is the underpinning platform for our MDR service. And they can use that to deliver the service the same way that our MDR team delivers our services to our customers. So whether they want to outsource it entirely to us to have a turnkey MDR solution that's now part of their portfolio, have it be complementary to the services that they're already offering to their customers, and it can be kind of a staff augmentation or capability augmentation, or if they want to use the tool set to deliver it how they're delivering it, we can accommodate all those. And we see all three scenarios playing out all the time. And our customers that are selling MDR are generating 3 times more revenue than our MSP partners who aren't. So it is there's a massive opportunity, and the growth is only going to keep skyrocketing in MDR. So we want to make sure that our MSP customers are able to capture that.
So much going on at Sophos, Eric. Thanks for joining me on this edition of Channel Futures TV and getting me caught up on all that, as well as the security landscape and the partner opportunity.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it.